Good evening all, and welcome. This video has been graciously sponsored by Hunt a Killer. Hunt a Killer is an engaging and addictive subscription box service where you get to be a detective. There's been a murder, and it's up to you and your team to solve it. This involves sifting through piles of documents, evidence, audio recordings and case files, eliminating suspects as you go along to crack the case and catch the killer. It's a fully immersive experience with very high attention to detail that makes it all the more fun and feel oh so real. It's the kind of game you can play with your friends, family, or partner. My wife and I have been playing it for a while now, and we have had the most fun during this whole COVID experience, and I highly recommend it. I know it's something that all of you guys will enjoy, believe me on this. So why not punch in the code MORTIS to get a discount on your first box? I know you won't regret it. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This is truly the scariest, most horrible thing that's ever happened to me. I have never been so petrified in my life. To this day, I still do not know who this man was, what he was trying to do, or if he still is where I saw him. I was back home for the summer for the first time in a year after starting uni. Our home was and still is just outside of a small town with forests all around it. There was also a small man-made lake which was diverged from a river that ran for miles through the forest and ramified into a few streams east of the lake. Near my home there was a small grassy path that led to the river following a stream. It was a long walk, but one I used to go on often as a child. I knew the forests there well. I knew where I could cut through dense trees to meet the stream. The walk I would always go on led me off the path, which turned northwest slowly, so away from the stream, and then took a sharp turn to the west after a few miles' walk, at which point the stream was quite hidden deep in the forest. I'd continue to walk north and follow the stream through the forest to get to the river, then follow the river west to get to the lake. It's easy to get lost in this forest because the terrain isn't just a slope down to the water. It goes up and down, and you end up completely surrounded by trees. I'd spent many days wandering around there alone, or with my dad over the span of 18 years. Never saw anyone else in the forest. I went there twice that summer, both times alone. The first time I left in the morning. I walked along the path away from the stream to the sharp bend, then cut back into the forest. I reached the stream after an hour or so. As I was running, my hands in the water, I heard a bell from far away coming from the north. Someone was making a bell ring fervently and periodically, which I found strange. I listened well, wondered if it was some kind of lost hunting dog, and started moving towards the sound. Yes, I know I'd be the first person to perish in a horror movie, but that's the way I was heading anyway. I realized it couldn't have been an animal. I could tell the bell was too heavy because of how clear the sound was to be on a collar. I kept moving and the bell was moving away from me, and stopped completely after 5 minutes. The stream wasn't big enough or strong enough to carry a bell that could have been enclosed in a tin or something, and the river was too far still. I thought of everything, but nothing explained the sound, apart from one obvious thing, which I didn't feel comfortable with for some reason. I knew it had to be a person, and I stopped thinking about it and just walked on normally, until I found a badger, a blue and dead one, carefully decapitated. It had obviously been done with a knife. It was fairly fresh, the body was still limp and there wasn't too much smell coming from it. The wound was full of maggots, but I knew that happened soon after exposure. The sound of the bell had been following the stream, so had I. So the badger was put there, maybe killed there, at least decapitated, while I was walking that way, I suppose. I'm not sure, really. Nothing else happened that day. 1 week later, I went back for the second time that summer and the last time ever. I left home at around 6 p.m. and made it to the stream, then walked to the river in an hour and decided to go back the way I came because it was getting late and it was raining quite heavily. The sunset was around 9 p.m. and I was walking as fast as I could. The sound of the rain in the trees was surreal and loud. I was somewhat trotting with my head down for a while through the clearest and most open part of the forest when I bumped into something heavy. The smell was sickly. It was the decomposing body of the badger, with its head strung to his front paws. That area looked like a ham because of the way it was tied, just swinging from a tree like an almost literal load of bollocks. It was at this putrid bag of stench, wet and dripping green liquid, that I started to gag. I had some sort of mucus textured fluid in my hair. It was repulsive. At first, I just stared at it slightly gobsmacked. Then I started fidgeting violently because I felt like I was drenched in its juices. I was soaking from the rain and my senses became confused. It felt like a bucket of ice-cold water had been thrown over me. When I realized I walked the same way to get to the river, so someone had strung up the body after I'd passed it on the way there. Someone knew I'd see it. So was someone watching me and running around the forest? Were the faint sounds of branches breaking around me not animals? I looked around and started jogging. I was half running, half walking away from the stream back towards the path for a while when I heard the bell again. I proceeded to call my dad. I told him to meet me on the path where it turns west. It was the closest part of the path to me, and to go as fast as he could, and that someone was in the forest. I can't explain the feeling I had. It was like I just crapped out my intestines and stomach. I literally felt the hairs on my neck raise despite being soaked. It was dark. I jogged as fast as I could. I was panicking because the path was still just a bit far away. Just too far to feel safe. It was still raining. Every single sound was muffled. I felt like everything was further away than ever before. The bell went on for way longer than the last time, on and off. I felt like it was surrounding me at one point. The fear combined with my compromised hearing and the fact that I couldn't breathe properly was making me lose my sense of direction. I was automatically heading southwest, but I wasn't really sure what I was even doing. I was breathing like a horse, coughing my lungs up, kind of crying out loud like a toddler does, tripping over leaves and twigs like an idiot. I stayed on the phone with my mum, who was on her way with my dad. I kept hearing sounds, but I wasn't sure what they were. My mum was screaming at the phone at the same time that they were on the path and I needed to run, and that my dad had gotten out and was heading east from the path bend. I was terrified, so I went into survival mode. I was doing the half-run, half-speed walk thing again as I was out of breath. Then I heard branches break, clear footsteps, and for the first time from down the forest, the bell rang louder. I didn't want to look over my shoulder. That's when I saw what was in the forest with me. A tall figure creeping in my direction at the very end of the clearing, ringing this bell slowly in front of his stomach. I could tell he was staring straight at me. Now, I don't know if I had a hidden secret sprinting ability or instinctual adrenaline-induced superhuman powers, but when I tell you I ran for my life, I didn't look back once. I screamed as much as I could. I lied. I'm on the phone with the police. They're on the path. Dad, I can see you. I'm here. I wanted to yell, Dad, please, where are you? But I kept that to myself. I felt like something awful was going to happen. I felt like the man was right behind me, and I kept telling myself not to look back. I was gasping, wheezing, crying so loud and screaming for my dad. I felt shivers on my neck, and then switched off. I ran. I even dropped my bag and only realized I didn't have it anymore when I was in the car. I felt like my phone was my only way home. Things no longer felt real. It was like my legs were moving by themselves. I didn't know if the man was still following me. I could only hear my heart beating in my ears and the bell. I finally heard my dad shout my name, and I knew he was coming my way and that he could see me because of the intonation of his voice. I pretty much lunged myself at him when we got to each other. My dad heard the bell too. My mum could hear it on the phone, and she was waiting with the car ready to leave fast. We went directly to the police station, and I got medical attention soon after. My dad burst into tears in the car. He said he could hear the bell and thought he wouldn't have been able to see me, and asked what if I didn't have my phone, and what if he hadn't have picked up. They were almost as terrified of me because they witnessed everything through the call. They could hear me trying to run, and they could hear the danger. They just couldn't see it. The police couldn't really do much. They searched the area, and the only thing they found was a folded t-shirt placed under a rock. I didn't really question that, and my bag was not recovered. They said it was probably some homeless man living in the forest, but failed to realize what could have happened if my dad didn't know that part of the forest, like I did, and where to find me. I'm not blaming anyone. The entire thing was my fault. There are just too many what-ifs. I want to believe it was just someone who decided to live in the woods and hunt or something. Maybe they were a bit mentally unstable and felt angry that I came into their territory. But what if it was more insidious? The way he moved towards me was abnormal. It was perverse because of how slowly he was ringing the bell. It was like he had trapped me. I didn't see any more detail. I just ran. To this day, I can't go anywhere where I'll be alone, and the sound of bells is a real problem. The smell of moss as well. Anyway, my parents and Steve Jobs saved my life, so go hug yours now, and take decapitated badgers and bells as pagan signs that you're unwelcome. This happened a few years ago when I was 16. It was a warm summer night. At nights like these, me and my friends would often grab a pack of cigarettes and a bottle of beer each and go outside to enjoy them. We come from a really small town where everyone is somehow connected, so the only way for us to smoke and drink without our parents knowing is to go to secluded places. Luckily, the town is surrounded with a huge forest, and we were all familiar with them since we practically grew up there. This one time it was night as usual. We both grabbed our forbidden contraband, some flashlights, and headed out. We took a path through the long meadow, which ended at the edge of the forest. From there it led to a path through the forest, which is about a 20-minute walk back to town, on steep downhill terrain. At the place where the meadow is and the forest meet, there is a gazebo and a fireplace for picnics if you are so inclined. As we were walking through the meadow, we would stop a few times to ensure from afar that the gazebo was unoccupied. It was around 11 p.m, and the night was incredibly dark. Even though we were out in the open, we had to use our flashlights to see anything. When we made sure the air was clear, we approached the gazebo to light our first cigarette. We were just standing there puffing and talking, while always scouting our surroundings with the beams of our flashlight. When after about 5 minutes, we decided to take the path through the forest back to town. We walked about 30 meters, at which point we couldn't see the place where we were previously standing. That's when we heard it. From the gazebo where we were standing just seconds earlier came a long, terrifying scream. It sounded as if a man was being cut to pieces while still alive. The kind of scream that turns your blood to ice. After the first scream, there was a pause for a few seconds. During this whole time, we were both so scared we couldn't even move. Then it started again, even louder and more terrifying. The second scream snapped us back to reality. Without a word, we just started sprinting through the rough terrain, not once looking back. At this point, I was so pumped up with adrenaline that I couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat resonating in my ears. I've never run that fast, and we didn't stop until we reached the lights of the town. When we finally did, we both just sat there on the sidewalk under a lamppost, panting and screaming for air. Nobody said anything for a good half hour. After a while, we started talking about it. We came up to the conclusion that either someone was having fun at our expense, or someone was seriously hurt. In the end, we decided to head back there first thing in the morning, but surprise, surprise, we found no signs of anything. We decided it must have been someone playing a prank on us. However, to this day it keeps gnawing at me. Something just doesn't add up. I'm 100% sure it wasn't an animal, as I've previously mentioned, I spent a good portion of my life in those woods, and I'm fairly familiar with local fauna. There is nothing around these parts that could have made those noises. I am absolutely positive it was the scream of a man. On the other hand, it would be almost impossible for anyone to just walk in there without any light since it was so dark, and even if he had some kind of torch, we would have certainly spotted him. Anyway, screaming man in the forest, let's not meet again. After lockdown ended, I went to my grandparents' house to spend a few weeks there. My grandparents lived in a small city in the north of France, and they have a dog who's quite big. When I was young, I lived at my grandparents' for about a year. At the time, the dog was only a puppy. Her name, Chippy, which in French kind of means like little devil, but in an affectionate way. Considering when I was living there, I played a lot with her, we were both very close, and that detail is important for later in the story. Now, two of my hobbies I have are long walks and running. Thus, every evening, I would go out for a long walk with the dog. There's a track that follows a path through the forest, and a small hill, as well as lots of fields for us to go through. The air is fresh, and the view's quite beautiful, so I would go out with her every day. I was also helping my grandparents, as she needed lots of exercise. The first time I went out with her, nothing happened. We just enjoyed our walk. It was about an hour's walk, traversing roughly 6 to 7 kilometers. The next day when we arrived on the top of the hill, in the field, it was probably around 10 p.m, but there was still some light because it's summer. There were 3 other persons walking in the field. They were younger than me, probably about 15 to 16, and I also noticed they were smoking. So my guess was that they used to come here so that they couldn't be seen by their parents. We passed them, greeted them cordially, and they greeted back. Once again, nothing special. I did this for a whole week, and roughly around the same time, 10 p.m, and passed those 3 guys several times, and had no further noticeable interaction. The second week, as I usually went out for the walk with Chippy, I arrived at the fields, and there were only 3 of the boys. One of them wasn't smoking this time though. When he saw me at the entrance of the field just after the little hill climb, and with the forest behind me, he made a sign with his hand to catch my attention and asked if I had a lighter, which I actually did in my pocket. I told him sure, so I went up to him. He had his hands in his pockets. When he came close, for some reason I felt a cold shiver. It's crazy how sometimes your instinct knows there's something wrong, but you don't listen to it because it doesn't look that strange to you. I hand the lighter to him, and when he passed by it at that moment, my dog was staring at him. Then everything happened really fast. He did a really fast movement with his hand coming from the hoodie, and I saw something shining. I instinctively pulled back, and then I fell down. I realized that he was holding a knife and had just attempted to stab me. What saved me was the dog, God bless her. When she saw the guy attempting it, she jumped on him and he fell down. She is quite a big dog. I immediately got up on my feet and heard something in my back. From the entrance of the forest, I saw 2 guys wearing animal masks running towards me. They were probably the 2 friends that I'd seen prior. At this moment in time, my brain was acting by itself. You don't think about it. All that you do is run. I began running, the dog following, and I heard the worst possible thing from the guy who was just getting up. "Catch him! Don't let him go!" At that moment, I was totally terrified. I wasn't just running. I was not just running, but absolutely legging it, giving my all. I was hearing them chasing behind me, thinking to myself, how long will they follow me for and who the hell are they? This was the first time in my life. I was quite glad that I'm a runner. I was clearly a much better runner than they were, because they chased me for what felt like forever, but I ended up losing them. At the end of the field there's another entrance to the forest, and this time it's a descent with a road at the end. I heard the steps of the 3 guys fading as I arrived at the end of the forest, though I didn't stop running until I arrived at my grandparents' house and locked the door. I caught a breath and gave a huge hug to my dog, and I saw in her eyes that she totally understood what happened, and I had never been so happy to have her in all my life. After that, I told my grandparents everything, who called the police, but they couldn't find anyone. I don't know what these guys wanted, but the animal masks really made me think they were some kind of weird cult or whatever. I really don't know. Satanist, perhaps? I still do long walks with Chippy, our dog hero, but I now go much earlier and to places with more people. To the 3 guys in the forest, let's not meet again. During college, that was located away from major cities, the woods were all around us. That being said, there was a highly rated trail, the Loyalstock Trail, which was about an hour's drive from the university. I invited a friend to come with me as he had never been on an extended backpacking trip, a 50+ mile trail that we intended to backpack over the 4-day weekend. I am an Eagle Scout who has spent countless hours in the woods and went on backpacking trips consistently throughout my college experience. As many have said before me, you get used to the minor spooky things that happen while out there. Coyote howls, raccoons in the middle of the night, even the occasional unknown noise. However, the scariest thing that you will find in the forest are people. We were about 20 miles into the trail, and being Pennsylvania where the underbrush and trees line the trails pretty densely, I always walk about 100 meters off the trail to reduce the chances of me disturbing people or people disturbing me, especially in the early morning when I choose to sleep in. Following that same strategy, my friend and I go out of our way to be in this amazing spot, a good ways off the trail where it would be even more difficult to see our flashlights from the trail. The spot was on a peninsula where the creek met a river, meaning there was only one way to our campsite and one way out. We start a fire, cook our food and drink some, but not enough alcohol to get us drunk. We put the fire out around midnight, head into our individual tents, and all is quiet. It's the fall semester, so leaves are on the ground, the moon is brightly shining through the bare trees and the air is cool. The only noise is the occasional time where I would hear my friend turn over in his sleep. And then I hear the voices. The voices sound very close, especially for us being over 100+ meters away. I check my watch and it's 3 a.m. Who hikes at 3 a.m? We're 20 miles in. I slowly get out my sleeping bag, slowly unzip my tent, only to see my friend peeking out of his in the exact same fashion. He quickly moves his finger over his mouth in an exaggerated shh sign, and then used the same hand to frantically motion towards the way of the trail. Then we see them. 4 adults, 3 men and 1 woman walking directly to our camp, no lights illuminating their path. They are walking silently at this point. Only one of them has a backpack, an impossibility for the long hike, as they were a third of the way through. Being a long trip, you bring wood cutting supplies to chop branches into smaller branches to burn. For me, this was a survival knife, grabbing the knife, believing it to be my only way of defending myself. I am more disheveled than I have ever been, especially knowing that a knife is barely a defense at all. These people walk into our site, sit down by our extinguished fire pit, and just sit there for what felt like an eternity. My friend speaks up and asks what they're doing in our campsite. Without answering, they ask if we have any food. Having packed as lightly as possible for the long trip, we only had a few extra Mountain House MRE style meals. I grab one out of my bag and toss it to one of the men. In rapid succession, I ask why they aren't using a light, and if they need help finding the trail, and why they're hiking so late. And they respond with the following: "We don't use lights, we know where the trail is, and it's better to hike late at night." Unnerved at this point, my friends asked them to leave. They responded by asking if we wanted to light the fire and hang out for a bit. No, we don't. They grab their bag, get up, and leave without speaking another word. We watch them leave and take shifts, making sure they don't come back. Needless to say, we both got very little sleep that night, and when the sun rose the next morning, we finally got real sleep. By the afternoon when we awoke, it felt like a weird dream of sorts. The only evidence was a fuzzy cap that they must have dropped, that I still have to this very day. I have never had something as weird or spooky as that happen in the woods, and I hope to never have it happen again. In the 8 years since that trip, I haven't been back to Loyalstock Trail. I live in the UK, and my flat is located next to a pretty large forest. There is a path which used to be a railway track, but has now been converted into a cycle walk path which links into the city. To preserve the heritage of the railway track, some of the old train stations still exist with their platforms, although the building itself has been converted into an open space to walk around. The path is fairly lit up, except the train stations. Last year, my friends and girlfriend had visited me over the weekend to party and have fun, since we live about at least 1.5 hours away. My roommate, who's also from my hometown and friends with the group, suggested we should have a campfire. Now, being a forest, I didn't want to alert neighboring flats and potentially get in trouble. The abandoned train station had good coverage from watchful eyes and was safe enough to do a campfire. It even had a pit from someone else who had a similar idea before. My roommate and I had checked out the place prior to our friend's arrival. So here we were at 11 p.m. We picked a time where there would be practically no one using the path, laid out our blankets and started our music and tried to light our firewood. It just wouldn't light, and we were running out of paper. Suddenly we heard a voice, although we could not identify where it was coming from. We all went silent, thinking a passerby had heard our music from the path outside the station, and after a few minutes of silence we resumed our activities. 15 minutes later, the voice was more audible and more aggressive. It started off with a grunt, and worse, and then sounded closer than we were getting comfortable with. "Who's there?" There was a metal sheet in the corner of the station, and my friend and I said he saw it moving. We all made a decision to pack up shop and leave as quietly and as quickly as possible. One of my friends was visibly upset and wouldn't move. We literally had to drag her out. I turned around and saw a shadow of what I believed to be a tall man staring at us. He started quickly walking towards our group. I shouted to leg it, and we ran until we reached the streetlights in my housing estate. We were all quite a bit shaken up, and in hindsight it was probably a bad idea in the first place. I bet it was a homeless man, or perhaps a druggie, that was disturbed by our fire. But I don't want to know what would have happened if we'd have stayed a little too long. I was hiking in the woods near my mum's house outside of Los Angeles. I have various health issues and have a medical alert dog called Riley that has been trained to do lots of different tasks such as detect seizures, help with directions, as well as various other helpful task services. In the past, whenever we've come across a dead animal like a bird or something like that, Riley points to the object and freezes. Upon coming across this bone that you can see on screen, many people I spoke to about it, including 2 women at the bottom of the trail, laughed and said that it was probably just some kind of animal. But I was in school for medicine, and know for a fact it's very human-like and resembles a sacrum spine. After realizing this, I immediately called the sheriff's department, and the next day, they must have collected it. Nothing made the news, so I'm guessing that I was either wrong, no foul play was involved and it was too old, or perhaps it was something else entirely that they don't want us to know about. A college buddy and I were out one night in my hometown during some break. I was obviously still living at home with my parents, and he was down for the weekend. It's a pretty small town, nothing to do there, so we found ourselves wandering around for a bit, and wound up starting a small campfire in a small sandy clearing in the woods near our local softball field. It was a clear night, not a single cloud in the sky, and the moon was full, so we could see very clearly everything around us. It was just one of those nights that was barely night because the moon was so bright. We were just chilling out and talking, no big deal, when suddenly we heard this scream coming from deeper in the woods. We both instantly shut up and started listening intently, trying to figure out what we just heard. Then we heard it again, this time clearer, and it definitely sounded like someone screaming, like a little girl in absolute terror. We both kind of just stood there for a moment staring at each other. I was mostly staring at him, hoping to get answers as to what we were hearing. My buddy was one of those guys who practically lived out in the woods. He's been an avid hunter and fisher for his entire life, and has spent a summer camping in Denali. I was expecting him to write it off as an owl or a hawk or even a fisher cat. Something, but the look on his face was probably more terrified than mine, simply because he knew it wasn't any of those things, and that just made me even more scared. Then we heard it again, louder and closer, and seemingly coming from up in the trees or in the air. We both freaked. Somehow we had the presence of mind to quickly put out our little fire. The abundant sand helped in that regard, and the moment the fire was out, we both ran as fast as we could just to get the hell out of there. We ran out of the woods, into the softball field area, where it was a straight shot out into the road, where we were both running for our lives, and the entire time we could hear this thing getting louder and closer. Scream, scream, scream. It was clearly chasing us. Just as we reached the road, for some reason we both stopped and turned and waited, and then heard it again getting closer, and definitely coming from the air and not the ground. And one more time, this time right above our heads. Remember when I said it was a cloudless night with a very full, very big moon? I could see the sky as clear as anything, and I heard a little girl screaming terror right above my head, but there wasn't a damn thing there. We both turned and ran, and this time we didn't stop until we reached my parents' house. I've told this story numerous times, including to people who are more woodsy than I am. Nobody's ever able to come up with an explanation. Some part of me is convinced it was an owl, but so far I've never heard an owl that made a sound anywhere close. This happened to me about 10 years ago or so, when I was around 18 or 19. At the time I was in a new relationship, still in the early stages, when everything was brand new and an adventure. My girlfriend came from a well-off family and had a very strict upbringing, and parents who weren't fond of her being out much, nor of our social groups, so it was often difficult for us to meet. To this end, we would regularly sneak out of our houses and meet up at 1 a.m. and stay out most of the night. The road she lived on was on an upper middle class area connected to a park/river/forest. That was by day a very popular destination with joggers, kayakers and dog walkers, but by night was a hot spot for dodgy folk. Not the safest place to go to at night, but a regular haunt nonetheless. On a different occasion, my friends and I nearly stumbled on a deal while we were all realistically airsofting. On a different occasion, my friends and I nearly stumbled on a deal while we all had realistic airsoft rifles on us. You would think I would learn. Anyway, so this night I head to her lane and wait around outside. I should mention that I look very out of place with scruffy hair and a long coat, and that it's 1 a.m. She's delayed getting out for reasons that now escape me, so I decide to chill and wait out for a while. Location-wise, I am at the side of a road, with 2 large fields on either side, both of which have large trees and a hedge line between them and the road. After maybe 20 to 30 minutes, I hear a car driving up the road towards me, and I get this horrible gut reaction telling me to get off the road. I felt like Frodo sensing the impending arrival of a Nazgul. I quickly climb over the hedge and drop down, prone to the other side, and stay as still as possible, and I can hear the car slow down as it approaches where I had been standing and wait. I'm fairly certain the driver must have seen me. The car stays there and no one leaves. The engine idles, and they just stay at that spot on the road waiting, I assume, to spot me again. I am terrified. I have no idea who they would be, but I can't shake that horrible feeling in my gut at all. I hide for what felt like hours, but in reality would have been no more than 30 minutes. The car eventually drives on, heading towards the car park for the forest and dead end. I still can't shake the fear and won't want to risk getting caught, but also don't feel safe, so I move to the opposite side of the road and hide behind the other hedge. Soon enough, I hear the familiar sound of an engine as the car comes back down and stops nearby where I had been waiting. They hang around for another 20 minutes or so before driving away again, this time for good. I can't remember how long it took me to get the courage to eventually leave. In hindsight, the rational part of my brain likes to just think that someone had just phoned the police on the scruffy guy loitering around after midnight, but I'm really not sure. Their behavior felt very off, and the feeling in my gut was like nothing I've felt since. At the time, I couldn't shake the fear of this unknown person just sitting in a car waiting for me to try and move, much like a hunter waiting patiently for prey. Best part? At some point during the night, my girlfriend advised me she couldn't get out that night anymore, so I just went home. Driver of the car, let's not meet. I'm from a really rural area and have recently moved to this city for university. I started feeling a bit homesick and missing the countryside, so decided to go on a walk in the woods close to my accommodation, as I live in the outskirts of my city. It was still light when I started my walk, around 2 p.m. With it being winter, it's getting to be pitch black at around 4:30. After about an hour and a half of walking, I noticed that it was starting to get pretty dark, so turned back because I didn't want to be in a forest I'd never been in before in total darkness, mainly in case I got lost. On my way back, I saw a guy maybe in his early 30s, obviously drunk with a plastic bag full of bottles of alcohol and muttering to himself. As I was on a path with steep slopes on either side, I was pretty much forced to walk past him, doing so with keeping as much distance as possible between myself and him, and keeping my eyes focused straight ahead. As soon as I passed him, his muttering became much louder, and I was sure he was trying to talk to me, but it was still unintelligible, so I ignored him. Then I heard him yelling and turned around to see him walking towards me. There was around 10 meters between us. I still couldn't make out what he was saying, but he was walking quickly towards me and eyeing me up and down with a really creepy look on his face. Not wanting to have any trouble, especially considering I'd only seen one person quite a while beforehand, I simply said, "Nah, leave me alone." He clearly heard, as I saw him register my sentence through his drunken brain, yet he simply shook his head and carried on towards me. At this point I panicked, pulled out my cell phone and shouted, "I'll call the police." I know this was an empty threat considering the fact I didn't even know the name of the forest and knew that it would be a long time before the police would get to me. Not to mention my phone was on 10% before I'd even left, and knew that most of the battery had been drained taking photos. I guess in this case I was lucky, because he was drunk and he froze. He put his hands up and mumbled, "Alright," before beginning to back away. I walked quickly away, looking several times over my shoulder to check if he was following me. It was probably a good thing I did, seeing as each time I looked he was facing me, maybe to check to see if I would notice before he could get to me. Like I said, this could have been nothing, and had simply been a harmless drunk guy that I blew out of proportion. Either way, next time I go for a walk, I'm taking my phone fully charged. I may not be an expert, but I do believe that there is more to this world than we understand. For all my life, I've had a very fine-tuned sense for sensing things that some might be unable to explain. Later in life, I would learn, or be told, that I have some kind of supernatural energy by a Wiccan witch. Nothing too impressive, but just enough to let me feel entities even if I can't see them, like the ghost in my grandparents' guest room or the malicious entity haunting the stairs and basement and garage. The same uncanny sixth sense that my mum observed when my younger brother was born, stronger than her own maternal sense to the point I understood when my brother needed something before even he knew and could make a sound, even waking minutes before him in the middle of the night without fail. But I think there's more to it than that. And this incident, as you will soon hear, is what leads me to believe this. My family had recently moved to British Columbia, Canada. That winter, I was 10, and while we were by no means in the boonies, we lived in an older trailer near a well-known hiking trail and a small Christmas tree farm. Immediately there was something off about the area, something that my parents waved off as new home anxiety, or just not being used to the place. I did my best to put it out of my mind, but within 2 weeks of the move, I began to notice strange things happening. Firstly, the unsettling aura that I couldn't shake, sleepless nights, as I felt like there was something that was watching me from the window. Strange shadows there 1 second, gone the next. Voices soft, whispering my name, and only when I was alone and in my room near the window. However, these incidents happened soon after, and I felt something brush against my shin and ankle, something that lessened the aura for at least a while. These instances would be near constant until I struck out my very own 8 years later. But it all came to a head that fall months after the move. My parents insisted we take a family walk on the mountain, and though I didn't want to because I am by no means an outdoorsman, something in me screamed not to go and that it was dangerous. But being barely 11, and of course, my parents completely dismissing my concerns as just being lazy, we were making our way to the trail entrance. As soon as I set foot out the car, the warning bells in my head were blaring louder. Something in me kept saying that we had to leave, that something bad was going to happen, and a little voice in my head kept focusing on my diabetic mum, who at the time had a weight problem, Dad with his disability that made him outright unable to run, and that my bad lungs would make it impossible for me to run myself. The three of us were essentially sitting ducks. I didn't know why I was so hyper-focused on running. I knew we just needed to get away. We were halfway through the walk when suddenly I froze. The apprehension I had felt about the whole event ramped up to 11. My parents thought I stopped because I was tired. I took the opportunity to take pictures of the lovely fall leaves and dappled sunlight. It was a gorgeous sight, but I knew something was there watching us, and it was not something we wanted to meet. I looked around trying to find whatever was setting me off, and all I saw was an occasional fleeting shadow. I could feel the brushing, but the feeling of dread and fear only got stronger. The familiar touch, unable to drive it away as it normally would. Whatever it was close. If it came at us, we wouldn't stand a chance, and I still didn't know what the hell it was. My parents still hadn't noticed something was wrong, and I felt my voice catch in my throat, not out of fear, but as if something wasn't letting me speak. I then heard the leaves rustle. It was close, so close, and I glanced to where the noise was coming from and saw a shadow for a split second before it vanished behind a tree. And as it vanished, something changed. Hot. It felt like a volcano had erupted in my chest, not like the slow, gentle oozing one might see in Hawaii, but explosive, angry, spewing, burning clouds of toxic grey ash, spraying molten rock and fire. I was still afraid, but I wasn't frozen. I was angry, eyes locked on the area that I had seen the shadow. I was no stranger to anger. I am an aggressive woman and always have been, but this rage was entirely new. The feeling against my legs stopped, but the fire was burning hotter, and the dangerous thing hiding just outside my field of view. I felt it lock up, in fear all on its own. I felt like my body was controlled by something else, still me, but somehow different. I convinced my parents to pick up the pace and practically sped out walking the rest of the loop, not daring to let the fire, sparked in my chest, die out until we were safely back in the car. This strange presence lingered, much further off but still watching, still malicious but almost curious now. We left the trail and never went back. A few weeks later, my mum found out she would be having my brother. As time passed, the whole incident kept nagging at my mind, and I found myself doing research from time to time to try and piece together whatever happened. And while I may never fully understand it, I think I finally have a part of the answer. I think perhaps I was protecting my brother. As I stated earlier, I've always had an unexplainable connection to him despite being so much older, and a terrifyingly vicious protective streak over him. When this happened, my mum would have been a month or so into her pregnancy. I think that whatever was in me allowed me to feel these presences early. Perhaps I knew he was there long before anyone else did. A phantom touch? Maybe. Whatever it is, I'm glad that he was kept safe. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. Christmas is literally a week away now. I actually can't believe it. December has sprung up on me faster than I imagined. It's all gone so quickly. It's like, December. The year's over. Nearly. And although a lot of people are like, yay, 2020's over, we've got to remember that 2021 isn't going to be better, unless everything gets sorted out at some point, which I hope it will. Soon enough, right? Yes. Well, I hope that you liked today's video. I know that plenty of you enjoy these rural style videos, and I would very much appreciate it if you would let me know what you thought. You know where. I'd also like to thank my lovely patrons and members whose names are actually on screen for their continued support of the channel. It really does mean a lot. You guys are amazing. Alright then, for now it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.